No one cares about your brand, not your category. And I hate all this low interest category nonsense. No one really cares about a brand. How do you make them care?
Welcome to the Whole Brand Briefing, actionable ideas to help build a world with more whole brands. A whole brand is an organization that treats everything it does as the brand, from marketing ideas to business ideas and all the ideas in between.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Whole Brand Briefing. My name is Tim Gallus, and I'm the director of the Whole Brand Project. I'm really excited today because we have the great and ever-evolving Gareth Kay. It's probably safe to say that Gareth has inspired me more than anyone over the years about the way I think about brands. He's been generous, he's been prolific, and his evolution has been amazing to watch, from modernista to Chief Strategy Officer at Goodby Silverstein, to Chapter, the company that he started, to now becoming the Chief Marketing Officer at Twill. I'm really excited to see what Gareth does now that he's inside of a brand and how he brings that to life to the outside world.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Gareth. And really excited to hear your whole brand briefing. Excited for others to hear it. When you hear the word whole brand, when you hear that idea of holistic or whole brand, what does it kind of conjure up?
I think there's a couple of things, Tim. I think there's one thing is they're not like most brands that we know nowadays, where brand is this kind of surface layer that's applied primarily through marketing communication. So PR, maybe some visual and verbal signifiers, maybe the ad campaign. Firstly, they have to be across every kind of experience you have with a brand. And at the end of the day, I think brands are only as strong as the kind of like, weakest chain in that experience link. And that's like step one. Step two, how do you make the brand not a thing that's an output in many ways or an expressive layer? I mean, obviously you need to have the expressive layer, but it's deeper than that. And it actually becomes the way that organization moves in the world, the way they do business. And it becomes an intrinsic element of their business model. And it becomes just the intrinsic muscle memory of the organization. And it's why I think the metaphor of that operating system is really interesting, because that's about something that instructs and inspires and enables. So it's not about rules. I hate those kind of like things where you have, brand as a set of rules. It's about a brand as a set of principles to inspire others to do things with them. And, the thing that always makes me fearful, frankly, going client side, was I don't want to be the police. I don't want to be the one who's walking around going, that document's wrong. I mean, you have to do some of that. I want to be the person who's hopefully inspiring other people to do amazing things, but doing it all towards one goal and doing it all to the end of putting a bit of magic into the world. That's what brands are there to do. People don't care about them because they're just not interesting enough. And I think, if we all started perhaps in a more honest place of no one cares about your brand, not your category. And I hate all this low interest category nonsense. No one really cares about a brand. How do you make them care? And, we all know from our human relationships there's about 4 or 5 different things you can do to make people care about you. So maybe go and land on one of those and deliver against that. And stop over-theorizing the quasi-business psychobabble and just get a bit more human about how we move and act and behave through the world.
It feels like in the world of brand thinkers, it depending on who you talk to, it gets beat up or it gets praised. Where do you fall on the word purpose and the idea of purpose?
God, my feelings about purpose, Tim, they change every week, I think. I think the problem is it's become a word that's become remarkably devalued, arguably more devalued than the word brand, because it is ill-defined and overused. I think every brand should be purposeful. It should have an intent that goes beyond simply the kind of like quarterly return of money, and acts as a counterbalance towards, I guess, the short-termism that unfortunately, is implicit in most of the capitalist models nowadays, particularly a shareholder-driven model. The problem to me is when purpose becomes, one, not defined well inside the organization. So you have companies going, we've got a mission and a vision, we need a purpose as well. And the question is, do you, or should actually the purpose be baked in to the mission and the vision? There's just too many, terminologies and phrases and slides that exist inside organizations rather than clarity of purposeful intent, which can be expressed in many, many different ways. And then it's all about what are you going to do about it? Because there's just like mission statements and vision statements. There's lots of really good ones in the world, but good damn, they're just either fluff or they feel really interesting, but you don't actually live up to them, And there's that old saying, which, who knows who came up with originally, but it's always been applied to Bill Bernbach, which is a principle isn't a principle until it costs you money. I think you can just insert the word purpose there, to be quite honest. It probably will cost you money in the short term, but hopefully it will leave the world in a better place. And actually, I think there's enough evidence now to suggest that it can actually lead to you as a business making much more money in the medium to long term. So it's a win-win situation.
I want to ask you a couple questions based on your trajectory. Was there something where you said, this is how I want to do it from now on versus the way you were doing it?
I think there was probably two moments where I've probably felt the most growth in the shortest period of time. And it's been the kind of growth that's been the growth and it lives with you and it changes your view on the world. I think the first was probably as I joined Modern Easter, and there was obviously, I'm learning about America and realizing, scale, size, difference, all those types of things. But that was a time as well that the planosphere was happening and the kind of initial early blogs and the kind of community forums of planners. And suddenly it was the promise of conferences made real, where actually you would see the best thinkers kind of work things out in real time. I think, a lot of the folks of the kind of early bloggers like, Richard Huntington and Russell Davies would talk a lot about how in many ways the kind of the reason for doing blogging was to help them work out their thinking, like try it out, prototype it in public. The second big moment for me was the year and a half or so I spent at Goodby working with the Google Creative Lab. And I cannot underestimate what a transformational experience that was, how important it was for me to think about how you develop brands and actually how you work to do that. And it was challenging because the way they work is absolutely antithetical to the way an agency works in many ways, just in terms of the speed, the desire to show the thing rather than show the thinking, the absolute disdain for the classic creative presentation or pitch presentation, the big reveal after 6 weeks. And that caused some challenges, candidly internally to make the team work in the way it needed to work. But I learned so much there about the importance of real collaboration and actually that whole mantra of, none of us is as good as all of us. And the ability and I think the evidence I saw that actually the faster we move, the better we can be, and I think there is something that's really powerful about fast. I think it can be misused. I think the way that, for example, the kind of move fast and break things is wrong. It's just like being a bull in a china shop. But I think there is a way to break down all these cycles of approval and just get something which goes, I've got this thing, I don't know what it is, what do you think of it? And you go and have a conversation around a prototype, be that a poster, be it a bit of code, be it a product, whatever it might be. That to me was just a big aha moment as a strategist in particular, which is the slides don't matter, and boy, did that feel uncomfortable because, what did you peddle? You're a peddler of slides and like cleverness and wonderful turns of phrase. The reality is, when you don't actually show the thing, you end up either with a game of telephone, and so it gets misunderstood, or frankly, trying to describe a concept. It's like that great phrase that Elvis Costello had, which is around writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's stupid, but someone has to do it. And that was what we were doing far too much, rather than going, here's 3 things. This is really good at this. If we do this, it means this. All the kind of implications of the strategic thinking.
Do you feel, that the back to the marketing industrial complex, does it feel like that's working against that? I've always seen you as a bit counter to the paradigms of the industry, the marketing industry traditionally.
It's arguably counter to the way we built businesses, certainly since probably, the era of, the early GM business models from the 1920s. We're still living by those organizational rules in many ways, and it does run counter to it. And, you notice things like marketing versus brand. And, does brand nest under marketing? Normally it does. I think that's utterly wrong. I'm very desperate for a world where, quite candidly, marketing nests under brand. Because I think that what the world needs is more organizations that truly deliver a brand across everything it does, that informs its financial model, its sales model, its product. And that means you need to either have chief brand officers, quote unquote, or whatever you may want to call them, either is the CEO or becomes CEO, or at the very least is in that small group of half a dozen critical executives that lead the organization. And it's a massive change. And to be a brand-led organization as opposed to a marketing-led organization, I think is very, very different. Because the marketing-led organization tends to be arguably communications-led, quite candidly. If it is genuinely marketing-led, it tends to be about how do we understand how people buy in this marketplace, and let's do that. Therefore, you're doing the same thing as everyone else. There's not very much distinctiveness. You get the relevance bits, but you don't get the distinctiveness piece. And you also don't get the big leaps of, well, that may be how things are done today. There might be a better way of doing things tomorrow. And, that's what we learn. I believe we need to learn from technology. It's not the thing, the shiny objects. It's about that etymological meaning of the word technology that Ben Horowitz talks about a lot, which is about technology being a better way of doing things.
Well, that kind of takes me back to the second part of your shift, stepping into the Google Creative Lab and the DNA of Google, and feeling that the thing versus the thinking. And now that you're inside of an organization and working on that, feeling that, what do you think it is? Because, hard thing to do. You can't do that with a mandate. Say, we're all going to bake this into the DNA. But what do you think Google has done? What do you think happened there over the years that you were allowed, that, when you walked into it, it was such a well-oiled kind of DNA, well-oiled machine that's always been focused?
It's probably the bit when I lose any chance ever working at Google and probably annoy some of my ex-clients. I think the Google Creative Lab is remarkably different to Google. And it is the skunk work R&D lab, Lockheed Innovation Center, that works at the edges and has built up permission, and hats off to Lorraine, the CMO, for doing this, and has built up the credibility because of what they have done to be able to go, the experience should be this. And it's interesting, they backed into that by basically building credibility through advertising and all that great, Chrome communications over time. Now they hardly ever touch ads. It's all experience. It's about making maps better. It's about making Gmail better. All these kinds of things. So I think they're an interesting oddity at Google. And the way it works, which is really interesting, is they deliberately keep themselves at the edge of the company. So they don't report into anyone inside a business unit. They're in New York, not Mountain View. They're on their own floor in New York, where you have to have a specific pass to get into it. You can't get there through the general reception area. It is as much on the periphery of that company as they possibly can be. Maybe more so than Google X, quite candidly. And I think that says quite a lot, which is their job is to go and inspire, infect, change from the outside in. When you actually, my experience working with Google, it's a brilliant company. Do not let me say it isn't. It's a brilliant company full of incredibly smart people on a really interesting mission. When you work with the core part of the business, and the more you get to the real money-making part of the business, i.e. search and ads, the more difficult it becomes to be genuinely innovative. So I think the interesting thing is really big companies, stuff on the edges becomes really important because they can infect if you set up the permissions and you give them the trust that they need. I think that's really, really critical. And you see similar things, I think, that happen, at Apple with their Black Ops group, and maybe the teams that Johnny used to run, for example, become really interesting. And I think big companies need that because it's very easy just to get into the rhythm of do what we did last year, make it 5% better, maybe 2% better. And we've all seen sadly the end result of that. Look what happened to IBM. Look what happened to Sun Microsystems. They were the most innovative companies in the world, and they stopped being innovative. They stopped pushing, and they became about maintaining a status quo. And it's that great lesson in challenger brand thinking, that Adam Morgan and Mark Barden will talk about, which is it's not about achieving a goal. You always have to have that challenger mentality and be prepared to fly unstable. And that to me becomes really interesting when you see kind of like brand leaders go on the offense, like Nike, and how they moved towards a DTC model really, really quickly. It wasn't easy. It was painful. But boy, the leaders just basically change that category. And that to me is fascinating.
That's great. Hey, this has been great, Gareth. Thank you.
I hope it helps, Tim. It's a fun set of questions, a really fun set of questions.
It helps a ton. And, we kind of started this way, but I hear you riffing a little bit, and I hear some things that maybe you've been thinking about for a while, but you got to get back to writing.
Oh man, you got
to put this stuff down.
Thank you. You got some really interesting stuff, and I think the Google thing was. You asked a really good question. And I don't think anyone at Google has been pissed off. It's just that really interesting thing where you go, maybe that's what they need. At that size of an organization, maybe you just need to have the sleeper cell, on the outside of the business. Yeah. Where every now and then just come in, drop an IED off and wander out again, And this stuff's all powerful.